Welcome everybody to our webinar today, our final webinar of 2022 and what looks like it's going to be the biggest webinar of 2022 as well. What we thought we'd do is we'd close out this year with a review of 2021. Let's have a look back on this interesting year after what was a super interesting year in 2020, if we can put it that way. And not only look back on some of the lessons learned for 2021, but also have a look forward into 2022. I will say before we get started, Stuart Caborn from Nomad Foods was due to join us. Unfortunately, he wasn't feeling well today and hasn't been able to make it. So we wish Stuart a speedy recovery and hope to see him on a webinar in early 2022 when we kick these back up again as we go forward. But all the best to Stuart and that he feels better soon. But having said that, we have a star-studded lineup today. We have Len DeCandia, who's Global Chief Procurement Officer at Johnson & Johnson, and Graham Crawshaw with CASME, who we all know. I'll let each of you gentlemen introduce yourselves. Len, if you'll go ahead.
Sure, I mean, happy to be here with everyone and wish everyone well. So yeah, Len DeCandia, Chief Procurement Officer here at Johnson & Johnson. Been in the role about 6 years now. Responsibilities across all the enterprise and support all the key functions. About a few decades of experience in this space. Over the past 25 years, I've either been a Chief Supply Officer or a Chief Procurement Officer for 4 great Fortune 100 companies. And excited to talk about the future because we've just learned so much over the past 24 months and continue to learn every day the value of a function like procurement. So happy to have a chat with the group about that.
Graham?
Hello, everyone. My name's Graham Crawshaw. I'm the Services Director at CASME. I look after all the content, the procurement content of all the activities and events that CASME does during the course of the year. So essentially, I'm here representing the almost 200 global organizations that make up the CASME membership. So be able to throw some insights into the conversation, because we've been talking non-stop about not only what's been going on in 2021, but looking forward to 2022. So delighted to be here.
Thanks very much, Len and Graham. And I'm Omer Abdullah. I'm a co-founder of the Smart Cube market intelligence organization, analytics organization, and I'll be facilitating our conversation today. All right, so in terms of our session overview, we're going to be dividing our conversation up into 3 broad parts. The first part we're going to do is a look back at 2021, which is, interestingly enough, been a really turbulent year. And actually a lot of positives and a lot of challenges that we've grappled with over the last year as well. Then we're going to get into conversation around the challenges, et cetera, opportunities that 2022 represents. And then we'll close out the conversation with the third part of our discussion, which is to share some personal perspectives from Len and Graham and myself for both CPOs and new folks coming into the procurement function as well. So broadly, we'll structure our conversation in those 3 parts. So to kick off our discussion today, let's start with part 1, which is a look back at 2022. Before we kick off, let's have some audience participation. So we have a poll, I believe, that we're just going to put up.
We certainly do. Let me launch that.
There we go. So the poll question is, what have been the major challenges facing your procurement function during the last 12 months? You have a number of options there. Please select the top 3 that you've seen personally. Inflation, supply chains, commodity prices, the working environment, the whole remote hybrid issue, remote work from home hybrid issue, diversity, sustainability, just to split that topic up from an ESG perspective, and travel. So let's give everybody a few minutes to...
And you've missed 3, Omer. Maybe you can't see them on your screen.
I got to scroll down. I'm sorry. You're right. Supplier risk, technology, and talent. Thank you, Graham. Yeah, so we have 10 options for you to choose from.
And only pick 3. To be honest, you could all tick all 10. but that wouldn't be very helpful.
I was going to pick all 10, so thanks, Graham.
Yeah, you can't, Len. That's
Follow the rules.
not allowed at all. There's always someone that tries to push their luck, because the system will let you do more than 3 if you really want to. But the idea is to get people to think and sort of reflect on 2021. So what's the most significant? So just waiting for that poll. People are still answering, so we'll give a few more seconds, as it does take a little time to respond. But thank you for submitting your responses there. People we'll share all the results of that poll just as soon as we close it out. So everyone's waiting with, well, hopefully interest and wanting to know what that's going to look like. But the numbers are still going up. Going to give it about 5 more seconds for people to complete, and then we'll close the poll and share the results. So I wonder if our predictions are right. So okay, let me end the poll and share the results, so now everyone can see the same chart.
All right, so let's take a look at the results here. So in number 1 place, no surprise, we've got supply chains, supply chain availability, bottlenecks, constraints as being the number 1, with about 65% of the vote. In number 2, oh, these are close, inflation and supplier risk are pretty close, 49 and 47%. So I'm just making notes as we talk, because we're going to do a little compare a little bit later with another poll looking at 22. And then in 3rd place, we had commodity prices. Okay, at about 41% of the group saying that's a big issue. And then beyond that, I think we've got a pretty significant drop off. After that, it goes to talent, working environment, related issues as well. And then others beyond that after that. Len and Graham, thoughts around that? Supply chains, number 1, inflation / supplier risk at number 2, and then commodity prices at number 3.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I think very consistent with what I thought we would see. Always happy to participate in these types of events, because you just want to make sure that your colleagues all see the same similar challenges. But absolutely, from the outset of this year, many of my conversations with our executives have fundamentally been supply will be the number 1 risk to growth for 2021. I think many of us came into 21 with a lot of optimism, I think, coming out of the pandemic with the hopes of vaccine and so on. And I think, you know, the optimism is important for us as human beings, but the reality is probably 21 was even more difficult than 20 because of some of the high hopes. But then it was the manifestation of 21 and starting to see demand kick in, and then the impact on supply with demand really outpacing it. So not surprised to see those dimensions, because obviously inflation and commodity prices are a direct correlation to a demand that's completely outstripping supply.
Yeah, definitely. That seems to be continuing. Graham, what about you? Does that kind of jive with what you're hearing from CASME folks?
It certainly does. I mean, no surprise. And as you say, Len, it's almost that comforting reassurance that we're all on the same page. Right. And if your challenges are vastly different, then why would that be the case? So yeah, supply chain definitely has been, it's almost been building throughout 2021. And yeah, the issues around inflation, they're all interconnected in many respects. And we've certainly seen that. And it's almost gone around the world with the way that different pressures have moved on and had an impact. So yeah, I'm not surprised at all on this. Also, in terms of supply risk, we're probably going to cover a bit more depth on the on that, but that's such a hot topic as suppliers themselves have been de-risking their activities, and so you can't always assume that just because you spend a lot of money, it means that suppliers want to work with you. So it's certainly created some challenges. Yeah.
Great.
Len, if I can maybe look at your personal experience over the last year and kind of what you've been grappling with and working through it at J&J, what would you say? I guess these align, clearly there's alignment here between what we've just seen in the poll and what you've worked through. What would you say, as you reflect back, are the one or two or three biggest themes that come to mind as you look back on 21?
Well, look, if you're in the world's largest healthcare company during the greatest healthcare crisis of our lifetime, you have a strong sense of responsibility and accountability, and everyone here at Johnson & Johnson really has felt that throughout, right, ever since the beginning. And you know, it's an issue around the fact that we needed to continue to supply life-saving drugs. We needed to continue to do research on next generation life-saving drugs. And we needed to make sure we were aware of what was happening at the customer and patient level in every market, in the 60+ markets that we operate in. And, you know, we use the analogy that everybody was, you know, in the same ocean, but everybody's boat was unique and different. And so for us, it really was, were we prepared to handle an event like this before it even happened? Were we future ready? Were we connected digitally, globally? Were we able to connect our internal business partners with our critical external partners, regardless of the work that needed to be done? Everything from being able to continuously supply product, as well as continue to do our research and development work, continue to work with our commercial organizations, continue to work with physicians and communicate with them. So having that interconnectivity and the ability through that enablement to keep business flowing and moving forward was really our number one responsibility. And it started with being out in front and having PPE available for our employees. We have almost 100 sites around the world, for our critical suppliers, and keeping them operating and running, for our frontline healthcare workers that we support, as well as the communities where our employees and our customers and patients evolve. Right up to right now, we're still very much involved in providing testing materials to keep our plants up and running and return to work type practices. So we've been involved in every aspect of keeping the business running, and have been able to support 15 to 20% growth through all of that. And so I think what you were ready for before the pandemic really manifested itself through the pandemic.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, you know, I sort of, if I can maybe distill down what you've talked through, is ensuring and driving continuity at multiple levels, not only from the security of your own folks, right the way through to driving as much business as usual as possible. And then on top of that is what you've been doing with the vaccine, and getting that out to market. So it's that continuity, and then the stakes, of course, are just all the more higher because of what you happen to be doing business around. So that makes absolute sense. So I'd imagine all of these things that we've talked about, certainly supply chains you've referred to and implied there, dealing with inflation issues we've talked about there, the risk aspects all play out, and certainly commodity prices we know will ultimately play out and influence as well. So lots of levers to drive on. And on that note, and actually maybe related to something, Len, you and I talked about a couple of months ago when we spoke at DPW, from a technology and an investment, and actually not just technology, but in terms of getting the process in procurement and the people ready in technology, you have to do a lot of homework there to be able to respond and be as to drive as much continuity and success as possible this year. Is that fair?
It's very fair. Look, we were digitally integrated around the world in all categories of spend, right? So we were fortunate. I had the support to lead a significant transformation that we started in 2016, so that by 2019, we were integrated in terms of our ability to digitally buy from every country that we operated in, and people were able to be connected to our supplier base from their homes through our systems, right? So now you're talking about not only the ability to connect, but also the ability to connect with speed and the ability to connect with scale. So now we had a line of sight around those solutions anywhere in the world, so that we were able to take best practices or learnings and translate them quickly around the world. And we were learning new things every day depending upon the situation and conditions, right? You know, many hospitals had to focus solely on COVID patients and moved away from elective surgeries. Others were trying to balance and manage all of that. And so our ability to be able to support what was happening in that type of a fluid environment. And if I could, let me give you an example of innovation that I think for us really talks about, and I think I'll build on this when we talk about the future. You know, one of the most important markets for us is China, and China was the first country that was impacted, obviously, with COVID. And many of us who know China well know that a lot of the healthcare is provided in some of the tier 1 and tier 2 cities. But there's also a huge amount of the population in tier 3 and tier 4 cities. And traditionally, we do most of our training of surgeons face-to-face with learning centers. So we literally had to find an innovative way to train surgeons in tier 3 and tier 4 cities because patients couldn't go to tier 2 and tier 1 cities. They were limited in their travel due to COVID. And we were able to scale an innovator, a supplier innovator around a virtual reality. In terms of not only did we introduce more surgeons in China to capabilities and skills of using our equipment through virtual reality, but we created greater access for some of all of our patients in those countries during a time of great change. And obviously that's a scalable opportunity that we were able to move around the world. And, you know, we use the theme here in procurement at Johnson & Johnson that we partner for growth and for good. And so what this did was it created growth for our organizations and for our customers, but it created good because it created greater access to those patients and greater ability to deliver healthcare solutions to those patients in a country that was literally shut down. So here is, you know, and I think many of us will have example after example of this, where innovation has been accelerated through the pandemic, innovation that will become sustainable and change the way we work and do business for the next decade or two, if not longer.
Yeah, it's a fantastic story because it clearly, it was essentially a forcing mechanism, which it probably would have happened over some period of time, but this just said, well, look, we have to get it done. Let's figure it out now. And that's pretty exciting in terms of the positives to take away from everything that we've dealt with over the last year and a half or so. Graham, how does this align in terms of what you have heard from CASME members in terms of where their big ticket themes or ideas have been? If you were to summarize across the CASME member base, what would you say are the 1 or 2 prime issues that you've heard there?
I mean, I'd certainly like to start by saying, overall, the pandemic has been good for procurement. We've heard that quite a number of times. And it's been interesting that as we got to the sort of June, July months of this year, it was a question of riding on the back of all those successes and keeping up the momentum. So you can't sort of rest on your laurels or just remain sort of congratulating yourself because you did a good job the previous 12 months. It's been about building on that. And so certainly seeing procurement companies, procurement organizations rather, really acknowledging that innovation is the way and sort of teasing out that innovation. And I think that's when you start to get the link with diversity and sustainability, ESG, all of those other factors that are actually contributing towards improvement, not only in terms of the way that you do your procurement, but the ability to then engage with stakeholders and really demonstrate that, yeah, we did a great job during the pandemic and we're doing an even better job moving forward. So I think, yeah, many companies have had the same challenges and issues. Back to the inflation point, we've almost had that perfect storm of issues that I think was triggered by the Suez Canal issue. That suddenly woke everyone up to, there is a problem. There's an issue of moving containers from China to North America to Europe. There's a growing demand of goods that's starting to affect commodity prices. We saw how the price of crude shot up. And suddenly it's all happening all at once. And therefore you've had procurement professionals that have never needed to deal with inflation, suddenly having to respond to suppliers that are putting prices up. And it's not possible. You don't want to just accept price increases. So it's a new strategy that's need to be sort of taken on board. And I think that's what procurement's done well at during the course of this year. So a lot of juggling, a lot of different activities. And so it's been a busy year for everybody.
So, I mean, there's great points. I think two things I'll just point out for myself, and I want us one more question, but then I want us to move into 2022 and let's talk about the future. I would say it's been super interesting to me that with all of the things that the immediate problems that procurement has been grappling with, supply chains, inflation, commodity prices, risk issues, et cetera, that there was still a lot of material conversation around sustainability. And no doubt it's an important topic, and no doubt it's a critical topic for now. But I'm actually really pleased as we talk about procurement's expanding role, that was part of all of these different conversations that were going on. And it wasn't, oh, this is a luxury topic, we can deal with it later, we've got problems to sort out now. But so to me, that was a super positive aspect of the year. And then implied in everything that both Len, yourself, and Graham, that you've talked about as well, is procurement pushing the boundary and getting more voice in what's been going on across the board, and not just in progressive organizations like J&J, where we've seen that for many years, and it's been had an important seat at the table, but across the board in other places as well. Let me ask one quick question, if you can give me one thought, and then we'll dive into 2022. What's the one thing you'd say that you've learned from 21 that informs or sets you up for 2022? Just one idea or thought or whatever it might be. Len, if I can ask you to kick off.
Yeah, I think the people experience needs to be a bigger part of how we introduce new thinking, new innovation. So the employee experience, the customer experience, and the supplier experience. And maybe we'll spend a little bit more time talking about that when we talk about the future.
That's great. Graham, yourself?
Yeah, I mean, my one is around ESG. I mean, those are three letters that really have only materialized in Europe this year. They've been used in the US prior to that, but it's that broader scope beyond sustainability. And suddenly it is an exciting area to start to do even more on, because not only does it get your stakeholders' interest, but companies, businesses have to be taking on that on board. And yeah, J&J very advanced in this area, but many companies are still almost scratching their heads and sort of saying, well, what should we be doing? And it's going much more beyond the elimination of the single-use plastic. It's that fundamental, what do we need to be doing? So it's one that started, we need to move it forward.
100%. I'll add just my quick thought on this is, I think we all expected 21 to be a positive year coming back in terms of growth and performance and things like that. But I think that even the demand ramp up caught us all by surprise, and the extent and rate, and we're seeing that playing out in all these things that we've talked about. So to me, it's that ability to sort of straddle that line of what we should expect versus what's unexpected, and being nimble in how we think about it. A bit of a conceptual thought, if you will. But to me, that was a big takeaway from 2021. But with that, I think it's fantastic. Some great points on 2021. Let's move the conversation to 2022 and what we can expect there. And before we do that, here's another poll. This is the same poll that we had for 21. But now the question is, as you look forward to 2022, what will be the major challenges facing your procurement function? Select 3 again. Same thing: inflation, supply chains, commodity prices, working environment, diversity, sustainability, travel, supplier risk, technology, and talent.
And can I just dive in there? We've had a couple of points about diversity. Again, it's a topic that's becoming hotter and hotter. We all understand the way the rules play out in the US, but you've got the rest of the world now saying, we need to be doing something here. What does that look like? Do we want to copy what's going on in the US? Or is there a better way of doing it? And so I think that's why we wanted to separate out diversity activity from sustainability activity, but recognizing it's all part of ESG. So once again, you can select 3, please don't take more, to really give us an idea as to what are you going to be doing when you return in January? What's that focus in 2022? And will be interesting as everyone waits to see the results here. So just giving a few more seconds, people are still answering. We've got just over 210 people connected on this this webinar at the moment. Apologies if the technology doesn't let you join in the poll. Sometimes if you've joined by a browser, it doesn't. But the results are very representative of what's going on in procurement. So I'm going to give it 5 more seconds, and then we'll share these and let's see what the difference is.
Yeah, Graham, while we're finishing up the poll, you mentioned ESG and diversity, and outside the U.S., and we've seen great growth in this space. And I know in Europe, our teams are doing a lot more in what they're calling social impact procurement. So procurement is really becoming an important partner to government around positive social impact, and I think that is an important element of ESG where procurement can play an incredibly important leadership role.
Excellent. Thank you, Len. Let me close the poll and share the results.
Okay, so this is actually quite interesting. So the finalists may not surprise anyone. The finalists, number 1 was inflation this time.
Yeah,
kind of makes sense. I think that's what a lot of talk about that, 64%. Supply chains at number 2, 59%, much closer. And then commodity prices and supplier risk at number 3, pretty close, 42 and 41%. So similar to what we saw in and to look back at 21. I'm just making a note on these: commodity prices and risk, but different weightings. And again, now Len and Graham, how does that align as we compare the 21 and 22 scenarios?
It aligns perfectly. I did a town hall on Monday, which included, I think, around 8,500 of my internal colleagues. And the number 1 voted question for me was inflation. So you can see, and look, I think the world is starting to recognize that this isn't transitory, right? I think here, and the one thing that I shared with my colleagues was that we have a couple of generations of people who are in the workforce now that really haven't lived in an inflationary environment. And I shared that the first home my wife and I purchased back in the 80s had a mortgage rate of over 15%, right? And so we can live through inflation. But look, the reality is commodity prices, as we all know, fluctuate, but labor rates do not. Once someone gets paid more, it doesn't go down. And I think that's why, everyone is sitting here and recognizing, especially when many of us are buying and working through issues that are directly associated with labor or high value added items. And I think what we all need to recognize that inflation is here, and it will be here for a while, and we'll manage commodities like we have in the past, but we really need to understand and absorb what's happening in the employee and labor market. And I think that's an area where procurement can play an important role.
Yeah. And for the folks who are not US based and not familiar with the US housing market, that 15% number that Len shared in the 80s, over the last, I would say, Len, maybe 20 years or so, mortgage rates have been maybe in the 3s and 4s and 5%, right? And 5 is kind of high for where rates have been. So just a point of comparison as to, it's a material cost, particularly when you get a 30-year mortgage,
That's right.
and look at it across that domain. But absolutely, inflation seems to be the word du jour, so to speak, and yeah, I think that's right from a transitory versus sort of I don't want to use the word permanent, but at least medium to longer term. I think we're seeing a whole bunch of different signals in terms of what's going on there. Graham, your thoughts from the CASME perspective, how does that poll align with what you're hearing folks talk about?
Yeah, I mean, no surprise, very, very similar, with that inflation being the concern. I think here it's almost taking it as an opportunity and making sure that suppliers are not just taking advantage of that situation. So having that knowledge, knowing your information about, well, what is actually happening to the raw materials, break down the contract. And yes, I totally agree with you that labor costs are going up, but you've got to then understand, well, what is that labor cost as a percentage of the overall sort of contract? We all know of logistics contracts where companies try to hike up the costs because the fuel cost had increased. Well, the fuel cost is only about 30% of the total cost of your 3PL, 4PL contract. So it's applying that different approach and working with the suppliers, but still not letting a situation sort of take over. I think one of the issues also is not only the cost of labor, but availability of labor, full stop, to actually what do you need to do to get the right people to get the job done. And often it may not just be a monetary change. It can be much more involved with that. So working with the suppliers, and one of the things that we've seen over the last 18 months has been the focus on supplier relationship management. And so much of all we do is about relationships. And I think even though we're over the main firefighting of the pandemic, we've almost moved into this new phase. And I think relationships are probably as important now as they were when you were putting the fires out, getting PPE. So I think, yeah, definitely inflation, supply chain. It's interesting that the others are significantly reduced. I'm surprised talent is as low as it is, because there's an element of you do need to be developing, maintaining, having the right people in order to do what you need to get done.
Yeah, the only thing that everything that both of you said completely resonates, makes sense. I just wonder if part of the reason we're seeing inflation as being so prominent is because we're at the end of the year, typical time when we go to our customers and ask for price increases, and companies we have suppliers coming to us asking for price increases. So maybe it's also, I'm not downplaying the significance. I think inflation is absolutely a major issue. It might also be a little bit of a timing issue right now because we're grappling with it right now as well.
Good point.
But not to diminish it. So with that, as we look at prime challenges ahead of us in 2022, I mean, we've talked about a whole slew of things: inflation, strained supply chains, commodity prices, ESG, and all the components within that, the talent aspects. Len, clearly it sounds like you're looking at inflation as being the big ticket item to work on for next year. Number one, is that right? And then secondly, is there other things?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's the big ticket item that I'm working on. I would agree that inflation's been a challenge for 2021. I think for most of us, we're probably seeing the majority of the impact in 2021. I think, 2022, it'll be more manageable. To Graham's point, I think, demand will level off. Competitive marketplaces will jump in, and we can always move our business for those who aren't interested in giving us fair rates. So I would say inflation, it was more of a 2021 issue for us, or for me to mitigate and to manage.
Okay. What would you say, as you look to and look across the business landscape for you, and then the procurement landscape, what would you say are the sort of the one or two or three big things, the big themes that you'd want the procurement folks to keep an eye out on for 2022?
Yeah, I think, look, this is a time of great transformation, and I think it's really a critical time for procurement. And I think, Omer, last time you and I spoke, I talked about procurement going from a single lane road to a super highway. And I think we've got to think about the positive influence the function can have across the entire enterprise. And I use that analogy because I grew up in an era of heavy ERP systems that were very much supply chain oriented. And I've spent the past 10 or 12 years of my career as a C-level, my first 10 or 12 as a chief supply officer, but I moved into the chief procurement officer space because I felt that technology, specifically digital technology, has expanded my ability, or my team's ability, to have an impact across the entire enterprise, working more closely with functions like research and development and marketing and sales. And so on. And I think what that does, it really opens up the value that suppliers bring to the organization beyond just the traditional cost management. And what we're really pushing here is innovation and citizenship and sustainability, because we see growth and good, not growth or good. And I think people need to see ESG as a critical component to supporting your organization's growth. And why do I say that? Well, you know, customers, patients, they're becoming much more sophisticated, and they're more interested in doing business with those companies that are interested in taking care of the world that we're part of, right? And so if your customers are telling you that this is critically important to them, you better make sure it's critically important to you. And guess what? We talk about talent. Talent wants to work for organizations that are purposeful. People recognize that this is a one-shot deal, right? This isn't dress rehearsal. We get one shot at life, and our careers are very important to us. And who we invest our time, our talents, and our energies into is important to me. So those organizations are going to win this talent war with fewer and fewer highly capable and talented individuals that are out there. Ultimately, we're all citizens of this community, and shareholders recognize that if you are building a trust mark with your customers and with your highly valued talent, you're going to be more profitable. And I think the procurement function has a great opportunity to take those influences and those insights and those elements of strategic alignment and translate it to the supplier base that they help to drive and shape working with their business partners. And so for me, it's about innovation and citizenship. Those are going to be the critical important levers for us over the next 2 to 3 years.
I think that's fantastic. And I was just taking a few notes as you were talking about those. And the underlying theme is when you talk about innovation, citizenship, and sustainability, you didn't use the word cost as the prime theme, which is not to say cost isn't important.
Right.
I not to put words in your mouth, but I presume you treat cost as a table stakes thing. We gotta just get that sorted. It's not that it's not important, but we have to do it. But there are higher order themes that we've got to look out for and that we can influence.
Omer, we use the term value, right? Because I think value is really what we're talking about, right? In terms of just ensuring you're getting the best value. And I think one of the influences that procurement really has when you talk about the future, I know I've seen it over my tenure here, is procurement has an opportunity to be an amazing enabler. It could be the tide that lifts all boats. And why do I say that? Because ultimately, you know, the 50,000 plus suppliers that we have at Johnson & Johnson, we don't select any of them, right? We create the process. We facilitate the process that allows the budget owners and the business partners to be able to do that. But if we translate supplier relationship management practices across the entire enterprise, not only elevating our professionalism within the function, but within the company, it's unleashing the power of tens of thousands really smart procurement people at Johnson & Johnson, which is going to allow us to meet all those unmet needs of our patients and customers. And so, you know, I'm going to agree with something that Graham said earlier. Supplier relationship management is everything. But if all you needed was a cookbook, we would all be great chefs. And there's millions of books of doing supplier relationship management, right? But that's where our unique talents, our leadership skills, our competencies and capabilities, what differentiates us means that if you lead and run a procurement function that elevates your supplier relationship management practices across your entire enterprise, you're creating a competitive advantage. And that competitive advantage is what's important, right, to all of your stakeholders.
So every conversation I have with you, there's a great little nugget or a quote that comes out of it. The last time we spoke, there was a superhighway quote. I love the point you made here. We don't select suppliers. We procurement don't select suppliers. We facilitate the process for the business owners, which means our role is to drive value for the business. It's not us, it's about what's right for the business. And we're the channel to help ensure that that power is unleashed. So fantastic quote, which I may duly steal in future conversations.
You do.
And I always do. Graham, how does that align in terms of how the CASME world and yourself as you think about what to look at in 2022?
I mean, not going to disagree with anything, Glenn. I would say that there are still a lot of companies out there that procurement is still focused on cost. And that is top of the agenda. They have to deliver the cost savings. So for those companies, I always say that it's about positioning it, that almost don't worry about getting your cost savings. If you actually build the relationships, talk about many of the things that you've been talking about, certainly on the whole sustainability, you're going to get your business stakeholder to engage a conversation with you on sustainability. Whereas if you start going on about cost saving, they're not really going, they're just going to see frustration. But actually the development of sustainability programs and initiatives and projects, often, if not all the time, you still get those cost savings. So almost just don't worry about them, let that happen, and keep your conversation focused on the other added value that that procurement can deliver.
You know, Graham, people in terms of customers are willing to see value in sustainability. So in many cases, we'll see customers who are willing to pay a premium associated with sustainability because they understand the total value or the total impact in the long run. And I think as people become more educated around that and organizations become more sophisticated in defining value in terms of costs, yes, it's one element of it, but more importantly, it's really the customer and your business partner that translate that cost into what they define as value. And I think you're right. I think procurement has really look at it's a price of entry. I don't disagree with what Omer is saying, but you know, you've got to carry the cost conversation into a much more meaningful conversation.
Yeah.
And it's only meaningful if it's important to the customer. So if you can't connect it to the customer, then it becomes very, very difficult. It's something that's driven within your organization. And ultimately, if you're not operating around the customer and the customer's view of value, then ultimately in the long run, you're really not going to achieve your objectives.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So now, as with all our webinars, we initially worry about time, and then we worry about running out of time, which we are duly on course to do. So with that, let me take us, I had a question on 2022, but I think we can fold it into part 3 of the discussion, which is around advice for procurement practitioners. And I'd like to ask the same question, but for 2 different groups, if you will. As you look at, and this could be preparing for 2022, it could be broader advice for just folks at this point in time, but what is one essential piece of advice that you would give? So the first question is, what's one essential piece of advice that you would give to a CPO, a senior level executive, as we head into 22? And then I'll ask the same question again in just a few minutes. Same thing, one essential piece of advice, but for somebody new, just coming into procurement today. So let's start with the CPO. What's one essential piece of advice that you would give to a CPO as we head into 22? Len?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with the theme around supplier relationship management. You know, you are the brand of the function. You are the connection of your internal business partners with your supplier community. So knowing the culture of your organization, knowing the challenges of your customer base around the world, knowing the talents of your organization, and shaping the supplier base that's going to allow you to not only meet today's needs for your business, but also the needs of tomorrow, you know, really drive through and be the voice of supplier relationship management. If there's one thing I've learned through this pandemic is I believe that many organizations like me spent decades kind of looking at supply and supply chain in very linear ways, and we could optimize and drive efficiencies and be able to manage through single node type impact. Now, through the global impact, what we've learned is that, you know, trying to optimize single nodes doesn't work, that we're operating in environments. And I think there are 3 critical environments in business. There's the customer relationship management piece, which probably for many of us in our organizations, we've kind of invested the majority into customer relationship management at the expense of supplier relationship management and employee relationship management. We've almost commoditized supplier relationship management and employee relationship management, and we're suffering for it right now. I'm firmly believing that the issues that we're having with labor and supply chain are all about that. And so now our board's willing to recognize that you have to change the way you manage your suppliers and your supplier relationship as well as your employees. And so CPOs can be and should be And I have total confidence in my colleagues in this space. This is their opportunity to step up and be able to do that. For me, the conversations that I'm having with our CHRO is, in most companies, we're given two things. We're given people, whether they're direct resources or teams, and we're given budgets. And many companies have spent 99% of the time training leaders on how to be good people managers. And my point is, well, that's only half of what we give them to achieve their objectives. And if the CPO can be the voice of, let's elevate our practices with how we use our resources in terms of how we define value, when we define that value, and who we do business with, I think the CPO will continue to reframe and reposition the value of the function and their individual leadership for the future.
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, it's super interesting you say that. I think you're right. I think that the CRM piece of it has been seen heavy investment, and I think we're seeing a greater recognition and more so on the supplier and certainly the employee side. Absolutely. And you're right. It plays out in the war for talent that we're grappling with today. It plays out in the allocation issues that many organizations are seeing. We talk about being a customer of choice, and we found out in the last couple of years who is the customer of choice, right? When there's constraints. And I appreciate you saying that. And I'll say this. I mean, I've always thought J&J has been actually pretty progressive. In fact, you're one of the only companies that in your credo you mentioned suppliers, and that's been clear. And I think that's a lesson that I think everybody needs to take in terms of just it's a multi-way conversation. And in times like the last 18 months is when we actually find out what the implications of not paying attention to or paying attention to it really, really are.
Agreed.
So I think that's a good point. Graham, your thoughts?
Yeah, really difficult because I don't know whether to focus more on the sustainability one or risk. It could be either. I think the two there are very hot topics. In terms of risk, there's still the challenge of how many risks do need to be looked after and managed. How is the whole sort of business continuity arrangements in place? And it's all those unknowns as to what is going to happen. I think there's a piece to be done at CPO level in terms of getting some technology to really help in terms of risk management. And I don't think it's there as yet. I know there's a lot of frustration with the large ERP systems that are in place there. Some of the new tools on the block, they're almost a little too new. So there is frustration. I think there's something to be had there, because having that, eliminating that risk issue or reducing it will definitely make it easier for procurement. So I'm going to put that one. Equally, I could have gone for sustainability, but I won't take too much time on that because we've covered that.
All critical topics. And I guess what I would add, just from a CPO perspective, is in line with both of you said, around being more strategic in your thinking, around, Graham, as you said earlier, procurement has a voice. We've seen that procurement has a voice, and it's being elevated, and we've seen that more and more. So I think just that continued push to be strategic, to identify ways to drive value for the business owners themselves, right? And facilitate that process. Len, as you said, I think to me is the single biggest sort of takeaway as we head into 22. Now that same question, what's one essential piece of advice that you would then offer to a junior person, a new person who's just fresh, just come into procurement? So maybe Graham, I'll start with you on this one, and Len, I'll come back to you to close that out. Graham?
Well, first of all, fantastic. And I really hope that that individual has chosen to come into procurement, that they haven't fallen into it by accident, that they've actively seen procurement going on around the world and thinking, hang on, I don't want to go into finance, marketing, any other discipline. I want to get into procurement. So I think
no disrespect to our finance and marketing buddies.
Definitely. I'm going to say no offense to anyone, but we know people don't choose procurement. And it's like, why not? What are we doing wrong? At some point, that balance is going to tip. If you then get your role in procurement, I think my advice is you've got to think strategic, even within the scope that you've got. Be conscious. You hear many times that sort of you've got to talk the right language. You can't talk about cost savings to stakeholders, but then you see procurement professionals reverting back to what they know and thinking of themselves rather than the business. So I would say get that role and really think and align with what your stakeholders trying to achieve, and then do your best to support that.
Yeah, I mean, I echo that 100%. I think broaden your remit, think beyond your just job that you do, and the value that you can deliver. Len, your thoughts?
Yeah, look, how do you make procurement a destination? I think what you need to think about, and what I've seen, like I said, I left the supply chain, the chief supply officer world about a dozen years ago because I wanted to get out of the factory. I really wanted to see end to end what happens in the entire organization. And in procurement, at least in my experience, is I get a chance to, I have a seat that not many people have. I get a chance to see everything from identification to creation, development. You mentioned the vaccine earlier. We saw every step, and we participate and continue to participate in every step, end to end, around all of that. So it's a destination because it gives you a chance to really touch and understand how the whole company works. And I think that's something that is really been enabled through digital technology over the past half dozen years, because it's given us the tools to be able to see data so that when you come to those conversations, you're bringing data as currency and insights associated with that. So it becomes a pull to the business partners. And so the other piece is, other than sales, procurement is the other externally facing function in the company. So it gives you a chance to work outside your organization and understand various markets and understand what's happening in various industries and markets around the world. Incredible learning, incredible growth, and powerful capabilities that allow you to rotate in many, many other functions within the company. We're not in the plants anymore chasing after drums of chemicals and whatever else. That's happening, yes, but that's not what procurement is today. It's very different today than what it was a decade or two ago, and it's going to be that much more important in the future. I think people that are participating in seminars like this, that have the courage and are brave enough to try new things and do it in new ways, are really going to excel. And I think if you're young, you can't make a mistake. All you need to do is one thing right. You can make 100 mistakes, but if you do one thing right, then you really got control of your career. So I really encourage young people who have an energy to understand how the business works internally and want to learn and understand what's happening in the world outside, and be a voice for your organization around that.
That's fantastic. Well, great advice, both Len from yourself and from Graham. With that, we are just about there. We have about 5 minutes left, but just to wrap up before we go to Q&A, a few sort of choice phrases, if you will. We've talked about supply chains, inflation, commodity prices, clearly big ticket issues. It's important for procurement to connect at speed and scale. Procurement's impact has to run across the enterprise, so think across the enterprise and more broadly. We don't select suppliers, we facilitate the process for business owners. That's, I think that's gold. Procurement as a destination, I think that's a continued push. I think we are getting there, and we continue to move in that direction. And then last but not least, to have the courage and be brave enough to take the big decisions and think broadly for the organization. I think a lot of it is the mental mindset to have the courage to have that mental mindset to then take those decisions. I think it's fantastic. So thank you, Len and Graham. With that, let's go to Q&A. I think we probably have time for maybe one or two quick fire questions. So how do we begin? Okay. Graham, are you seeing the questions?
No.
Yeah,
Sharon's going to help us.
Sharon.
I can read this out, and I'll put it in the chat as well, in the panelist chat for you. For the past few decades, there has been a push to take procurement from transactional to tactical to strategic, and in the past decade or so, from strategic to innovative. In multiple organisations, it seems that there's actually a reversal in which procurement is taking a step back in favour of customer efficiency or lower headcounts. What are your thoughts?
Len?
To you first, Graham.
Oh, that's harsh there. I was just in multiple organizations, the reversal. You see, I'm not seeing that.
Yeah.
I'm seeing it's more about those procurement organizations that are getting well established. They're having their virtual centers of excellence, supporting maybe a small procurement team, but a highly effective one that's really focused on the category strategies and then outsourcing or managing the tail spend separately. So yeah, very few companies have got more headcount in procurement than they need, but I think it's more the tools, the technology, the strategy is actually moving us forward. And so I'm not seeing that reversal.
Yeah, I would agree. Look, I couldn't be here today and sharing some of the successes we've had as a function if I didn't get support from our board of directors and our executive committee to make the investments in technology and organization. You have to understand, we were a decentralized function for 130 years, but had support in 2016 to invest in people and process and technology. And I think that foresight has really positioned us to be able to stay the course during these difficult days. I can understand during challenging times with rising inflation and business continuity that procurement organizations from business partners are feeling like they're operating in a crisis mode. And I think, and I feel it in parts of my organization as well. So I think it now becomes your leadership skills. How do you deliver through the crisis without losing the focus on the medium to long? How do you make the short-term decisions that do not sacrifice the medium to long? That's where you need to challenge yourselves as leaders and your leaders as well, so that how you position the solutions to some of the short-term issues don't impact what you're trying to achieve in the long term. That is a real issue, and I can understand the question. I see it every day, and it really asks you to make sure you position your approach and solutions around the bigger outcomes.
And I just add one thought to it, which I think resonates with what both of you said, is I suspect the situations where we're seeing that are those situations where, to infer from Len what you said, the senior C-level board commitment isn't there, number one, on procurement, and where procurement progress was individualized and not institutionalized. And I think where it's individualized and then that person leaves, then there's trouble. But where organizations have taken steps where this overall support and they've tried to implement the right processes and structures to support the function, we don't see that regression as much. Yeah. Not to suggest it doesn't happen. I think that point of view is certainly valid, and we may well have seen it in certain instances. But I suspect it's where it's individualized and not institutionalized. We literally have a minute left. I don't even know if we have time to take another question. Sharon, is there a quick fire question we can cover up super quickly?
A question for Len. How would you advise to gain a seat at the table at the level you've described?
Yeah, you have to work for it. We've been talking about this for decades. I would say use data as your currency. So what you have to do is you have to create a level of engagement where you're bringing insights that people weren't even aware of, that allows them to rethink their strategies and rethink their approach to how they're using their internal capabilities versus their external capabilities. And I think many, many companies are really being challenged right now, especially with some of the labor challenges that are happening right now, is where do I invest internally and how do I complement that with how I invest externally? And if you can get out in front of some of those challenges and issues with data and insights, I think people will be more than happy to pull you into the room to help solve the problem. Use data as currency.
Well, thanks very much, Len. A great way to close. Data and insights, something very close to my heart, certainly. But thank you very much, Len, for your time as always. Graham, always a pleasure. We wish Stuart well. Sorry he couldn't join us today. And thank you, everybody, to the roughly 200 people plus people who came on for the session today. Appreciate it. Thanks very much.